Oh my gosh, I am just so excited for us to speak freely and openly in the light that we're about to emit together, Raminder. And, I obviously just gave you an intro, and I want to kind of lead with this question about like, what does a light warrior mean to you?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Colleen. First off, I'm excited to be here and excited to connect with the collective that listens to this and hopefully resonates with what we're speaking about. And if not, that's okay. To answer your question, what a light warrior means to me, um, it's I find it interesting because I don't know if you saw my story maybe a month ago. I had posted a question sticker about like what I should call myself
Yes, I love it.
because I actually don't know, right? And now that everybody's heard my bio, it's like there's a lot there, right? It's like, what do I do? How do I define this? What is it? And for us in this light working space, we know what a light warrior is, or we know what our work entails, right? So I think that on a surface level, to kind of introduce that, I would define myself, let's say, in that space as someone that, well, I'm a psychic, right? Or practice that, or all psychic, but I have those gifts unlocked, sometimes a little too much. Um, and
Me too.
I'm a
I know. I get
yeah, right.
it.
I'm a healer. I work a lot in like past life and trauma and the fertility space, and so for me, it's really about bringing the true energy of the universe down to 3D Earth and helping people understand really what's going on and why it's manifested, as well as like the matrix, like video game simulation we're essentially in, right? So bringing all of what we can create to 3D here where we're living physically, and helping people really navigate that in a time where I think that the dark kind of wants to take over. So I think right now specifically, that's what I could mainly kind of define it as. But there's so many facets to it, and I'm sure we're going to touch on a lot of them
Hmm.
during this podcast. But I think that's what I'd start off with.
Yeah, and I love how you brought that together and talked about, like the distortion and how like we're really within this dark energy space that technically has always been there, but most of us have
Hmm.
been asleep to it for so long or not in awareness of it. And then when we shifted into this massive like ascension energy or awakening energy, we started to see it come to life. And some of us had pinprints of it, or we
Yeah.
knew of it before we knew of it, and we just knew that there was a truth radiating through. And I know that this is probably something you really registered with, like when all this bullshit and COVID happened and all that
Yeah.
mechanism happened. Like, did it spring? Oh, I know that when I read your bio, like 2019, you started really owning kind of in the business side of spirituality, correct? Like,
Yeah.
did you feel like 2020 kind of really opened you up to step into a new level of truth that you didn't understand at the time or even know about before?
Yeah, so hindsight's 2020. So when I look back, I know that I've been psychic and I've had those intuitive gifts for a long time. I never really understood what they were, or I would kind of like get in arguments in anticipation of what would happen in the future. So that's really interesting to look back on because I didn't know like it was truth. And then 5 years later, I would get messages like, by the way, you told me to stay away from this person, or you told me not to get married to this person, or you told me this would happen. And I was like, fuck yeah, well, now that I know that I'm psychic, like, or like that those gifts are really unlocked, like I knew it was truth, right?
Yeah.
So that's been happening forever since I was a child. But me kind of knowing that there was more was probably around 2018, like 2017, 2018.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I really started to own what like coaches that I had worked with or guides that I'd worked with were telling me of like, you have gifts that you need to use. And I was like, what does that mean? Like, I come to you, right?
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, okay, this makes sense. And so I kind of started to lean into tarot, and then I started to use my intuition and stuff. And so it built on that. And then I just realized that I was chosen for a much different purpose than what I was doing. And at that time, I was practicing law.
Yeah.
And so I was in the big firm environment going through that really big awakening, right? In
Yeah.
about 2019, where I was like, oh, it's really happening. I had met my twin flame in 2018, who is not my fiance that I'm getting married to. So if anybody's a twin here,
I have a twin.
you,
I totally
yeah,
get it.
Yeah, if anyone's a twin here, I did not I didn't continue on that path because my twin has chosen to remain in ego. And so I decided to move forward, and I found a soul counterpart in my fiance Raj, who I love. And
Oh,
it's getting more conscious as the days go on, which I love seeing too. So that what I mean is like that awakening, the catalyst of meeting my twin and realizing who he was at that point was like, whoa, really crazy, because I realized like I wasn't tripping out. Like it was something that I called extraterrestrial, like in terms of a feeling,
yeah,
right?
I get it.
Which you know, you understand. So I started to really dive into like what's going on, who am I, who are twins, what is the purpose of like my like me being here, right? This is my last lifetime on earth. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, you know, and I was just going on and on. And so trying to juggle living a corporate billable life with the full-time job of an awakening was like I would be crying in my office like preparing for trial, like literally, right? And then, you know, pandemic happened. Like it was so bad, Colleen. And then I realized that the place I was at was not in alignment. I mean, I love the firm that I was at, but I wasn't feeling valued there. I wasn't getting what I wanted, and I ended up leaving a month or two before my contract ended. And I didn't think that the pandemic would happen. Like we knew something was going to happen if we were already awake. Like we knew an awakening was on the cusp, right? We didn't know necessarily what it would look like. At least I didn't. I'm sure some people did.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I'd had 3 interviews at a different firm. I went to Miami for my friend's bachelorette. I was like, I'm going to come back and get this job. Like I was chilling, right?
Yeah.
Come back 2 weeks later, pandemic. And then I was sitting at home, right? I had to use CERB and figure out how I was gonna live, because I was just like, wow, like I guess I have to really lean into my gifts. And that was when 2020 in March, I started to really own my business, which had already, like I said, started in 2019. But it was a trip because I never really thought that I would leave the system, right? But you know, I talk a lot about the system,
Yeah.
and I realized that I was very unproductive within it, and that the people that are in the system are not really getting stuff done. So it was like, as a light worker, we should kind of be on the outside doing more, right? And so that's when it all really shifted. And I was working for myself in law and other, like another firm, and then I realized once I got fired from that job, like the last firm job I had, like you're
You
not supposed to
can't go
be here. Like,
back.
why are you here? Like, why are you here? And yeah, so that's my spiel on that. But it's been a lot, and also with that comes having to accept that, right? Having to
Yeah.
accept like after 10 years of university and 3 degrees, like you know, I'm not going to do what I sought out to do. And while they're really beneficial, there's still that like grieving process of what I thought I lost, which I'm finally at, like, you know, really fully accepting. Like, you know, you don't really want that. You know, you don't really want to be there, but we're so deeply programmed to think that we have to be there to sustain ourselves and our life or have security, that unpacking that was really hard.
Oh, I can't, well, especially so knee deep in a governmental like institution
Hmm.
that main objective, well, one of them is conformity, keeping everybody in alignment with laws that they dictate for us to hold a certain light within. And as you've been awakening and actually owning this side to you, you couldn't no longer serve in that matrix, and you couldn't even be there. Like you were getting fired from job
Yeah.
positions because
Yeah.
you were like your light was too fucking potent. And then
Yeah,
you
they're
were
like,
like,
dude, it's been 3 months longer than when we've been telling you to get out. And I remember the exact time that my guide switched because I saw it after it happened
mm,
was when, like, first of all, this lady partner at this firm, I'm just not a fan of her.
yeah,
And she didn't like me. I think that she was intimidated by my strength as well as
mm,
like my self-esteem,
yeah,
right? Like she had that internalized misogyny within her that I felt like she projected onto me. She's like a white woman too, so just like, all right, like I,
yeah.
you know, sometimes you get that more with a person of color, but I digress. And she was telling me basically that I sucked in this one area of law, which first of all, I wasn't even hired to be in that area of law. Like they totally positioned it as something that I was already doing, and then put me in a field that I absolutely hated, right?
Yeah, of
Like
course.
partially they're like, well, sorry, you don't really like, with all due respect, you don't really know what you're gonna like. Like, I think I know what I like because I'm actually good at it, but okay.
Yeah.
Like, you know. And so she was basically giving me bad review and like tearing up my like opinions that I would write, because in big firms you have to go through a partner before you actually give it to the client, right?
Of course.
And
Yep.
so and yeah, so she was telling me I needed to like spiff up on this area of law that I hated.
Hmm.
And so me trying to, I don't know, go against my intuition, I guess.
Of
Like,
course. Yeah, I know.
I went to like this library in the firm and I grabbed the book that was on the topic of what she wanted me to like
Yeah.
spiff up on. And I think that was a moment that my guides were like, X, you're not going to read a whole book on something you know you hate just to improve or try to prove a point. And I think that that was like, that was the time where they were like, we need to orchestrate her out of this.
Yeah, we need to-
You know, because, and that was when, I don't know if you've been around since the, like before the COVID mandates, but I was advocating a lot for farmers' protests in India. I became one of like the biggest advocates in the world for
Oh my God,
that
amazing.
movement.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you scroll way back, like if you thought I would do a lot right now, like that was a full-time job. I was posting like sometimes 5 times a day. I would be on live. I was doing interviews every week, podcasts, like a lot. And that's what really helped me understand my privilege as a lawyer, right?
Mm.
To be able to actually break down, hey, why are these laws in India detrimental? Why does it impact us as Canadians? Because people were not understanding the connection, right? Even though we're like the largest visible minority in BC,
Yeah.
right? Like they weren't understanding how it impacts us. And look at how many farming, you know, communities are here in like Punjabis. And so I was like, okay, I can really use my knowledge to advocate.
Yeah.
And that's what ended up happening as well with, you know, the breach of human rights with COVID mandates.
Yep.
And you know, even though I got hate for my predictions and opinions, what ended up coming true anyways. It was just sitting there to be, you know, be calm and receive the hate and be like, well, see you in 6 months when this comes true.
Seriously, I know. Like, well, you just listen to me. Like I'm a psychic and I own those gifts and they're unlocked for me. Like just can you just hear me? And I wasn't as vocal as you were out in a platform. My job, because I believe we have pioneers and trailblazers that are meant to shift massive collectives of energy into like
Mm-hmm.
and small pieces to ignite. My job was the one-to-one in the background. So I was leading freedom groups. I was in spaces of homes. I
Mm-hmm.
was helping ignite, connect people together to create more like commonality to move through that people didn't
Yeah.
feel alone. And that's where I was hiding, where on social media, I would show and like I would share stuff, let's say of yours, or share stuff of like the people that were out there speaking it. But I never actually stepped in on IG to rustle feathers, to really speak
Yeah.
about it. And it wasn't until this podcast launched this year that like I was directed, like, we need it out by the end of the month. And obviously you get this channeled info. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's like the 14th, like February the 14th. Like, what do you
Yeah.
mean you need about it at the end of the month? No, it needs to get out by the end of the month. So all the pieces obviously fell together in the way that it was supposed to be, because that's how
Yes.
we operate when we're in alignment and we're breathing in truth. It all,
Oh, you're, one day ends up being a span of like 2 months time, right?
yes.
Like you just get down and you're like, all right, I'm doing this. What's the name? How do I do this? How do I make it happen? So that's amazing. I'm so glad that you did that.
Me too. And like by February the 28th, literally the first episode was out and I got the whole imprint of what they wanted. And now like that's how we
Wow.
got to here. Was I literally am following the guide. They're like, she needs to be on your podcast. And I was like, oh, she probably won't want to be on it. Like stop your fucking mind chatter and just step in and send her a DM and let her choose. And you were like, I'm so in. I was like, oh my God, I'm so fucking excited because I know the pulse of truth
Oh
you
my
bring
God.
into the world. And I know I feel
That's so
your light,
sweet.
right? And I like feel it from you. And I am just grateful that this dropped into my field to be able to serve in, but that I also get to meet amazing people like you on the same mission in the world.
Same.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's
No,
awesome.
I appreciate that so much. And, you know, I do like to collaborate as much as possible, right? It's good for us to have that, well, again, the collaboration of light and light, right?
Mhm.
Out there, more people seeing like, hey, it's not just me that's like that, or it's not just you that's like that. I think that's what I get a lot of within like my clientele or within my like platform overall, because I've been blogging for a while. So it's taken, a bit, and I don't have like that many like engagers, right?
Mhm.
But in general, it's like the community that's been there, like some have been there for over 10 years, right? Like a
Awesome.
long time,
Yeah.
and some are newer. But I think one of the main pieces I hear a lot is like the community, right? Like seeing like-minded individuals, being able to have a different opinion or your intuition validated, right? Because people that are now just unlocking their intuition or gifts or creating like their own self-esteem and value around that, they want to also know like their ego still wants a little bit of a check of like, okay, and that's not a bad thing. I think that's a normal part of it, right?
Yeah.
That's a healthy part of it too. Is like, okay, like there are other people that are like me out there, right? It's all about, we talk about representation matters when it comes to BIPOC individuals or marginalized groups, but even for us, like, yeah, representation matters. Like, are people out there really speaking about it?
Mhm.
And, you may have been doing it a little behind the scenes for a bit, but that's just as important, right? Having that one-on-one interaction and being able to give people that space to feel seen and heard. And we'll do that in such different ways. And I think that it's like slowly, finally becoming
Mhm.
more of like a majority or dominant energy,
Yeah.
right? Like it took a while for us to tip, but we have tipped into that space where like having empathy or more subjectivity is the goal, right? Rather
Absolutely.
than like, let's just continue to shut you up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Prime example is like, I guess the news was talking about a new variant. I didn't even know this, but that goes to show how much like the power has shifted, right? I only
Yeah.
heard from an engager under a post like on the news. I was like, I don't watch the news. I was like,
Of
if I
course.
know that there's a new variant, I know that through social media,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like I
Just
don't
watch
really
Rebel
watch.
News. They'll put it up.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, like someone will post about it, but I think
yeah.
like just something like that, knowing that people aren't freaking out, seeing the possibility of this new variant is showing how we actually really dictate our reality, right? 'Cause
Hmm.
everybody jumped on that train. Oh
Yeah.
my God, new variant. Oh my God, oh my God. What would happen? We would be back in lockdown right now. We would be back in restrictions. We would be back to masking,
Yeah.
at least in BC,
And
for
oh, of
sure.
course in BC. Well, Ontario
Ontario
too.
and
Not
BC,
even
yeah.
better. That's right. Well, I grew up in Winnipeg, and that wasn't better either. But I lived in Ontario for most of my adult life. Well, here and there out of Ontario. I lived in California too for a while, and obviously,
Oh,
in
cool.
Costa Rica
Yeah.
now, which is like a totally different vibe all in
Oh
of myself.
gosh,
Oh my god! I'm like,
I
oh,
just want to come.
come and visit. I have a spare room. You can come and visit.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Get on the
coming right
plane.
now.
Oh my gosh. I want to bring it back to something that you said that I think is really an imperative thing for those that are really battling within themselves to embrace this new life, even though it's not new, it's a remembered life and you've always had it in you, but we were all conditioned in a certain dynamics to not hold that as actually truth within us at the time. But you said the word acceptance, and you had to really step into accepting the fact that you were a psychic, that you were meant to do other things, that the lawyer side, obviously very pragmatic, go to
Hmm.
school, learn things through a book, tons of words, education, grounded 3D energy in that matrix needed to really shift. So I'd love to hear about two things: the acceptance part within you that led you to be able to be here today and serving in the energy that you serve within, and then how you had to shift through that lawyer energy to really fully lean in to it, because they're two different worlds. And when I was like, I told my
Hmm.
girlfriend about you, and I was like, I'm interviewing a lawyer slash a psychic healer slash activist. She's like, holy fucking shit. And I'm like, I know, it's gonna be great.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Yeah,
Amazing.
like it was the acceptance piece. It was like, okay, getting to where I am academically and when I graduated at that point, let's say, it was very difficult.
Mm.
So even though it was like a Pyrrhic victory for me, you know, I worked really hard. I felt like at the end of it, of course I had to succeed, or of course I had to graduate. Like it was hard. Like there was a lot of mental health stuff going on as well. But it was that feeling of relief, right?
Mhm.
And then I kind of went back into the space of uncertainty again. And so that was difficult because I had to be like, well, what do I really want to do? And I finally had the relief of, okay, I can relax now. I don't have any more exams. I have security, right? Which was a very real thing that I needed at that point. And that we all need overall, right?
Mhm.
Even though sure that security comes from within, like I had something that I could look at as like, oh, this can't be taken away from me.
Right.
And so unfolding all of that and unraveling it and being like, okay, like sure you worked really hard to get here. Are you happy? Is it what you thought it would be? And I succeeded in the profession. I did well, like all of that. And so it wasn't like, you know, I wasn't doing well or I didn't like it. Like I was on a lot of boards and I was a chair of a committee and,
Mhm.
you know, I was doing work in the space of advocacy and activism. But the problem was that the decisions I wanted to make went through a bureaucratic process,
Mm.
right? The
Yeah.
white man at the top basically wanted to be able to sign off on, is this something that we need, right?
Mm.
And so because the systems are colonial, of course they're not ruled to in the structure of knowing like, well, what needs to happen, right? That's why the systems just don't work. And mind you, not everybody was the old white man, but in terms of the mentality of what we needed, or in terms of the validation that people wanted to like make a different decision. And for me, I was like really annoyed with it taking so long to make certain decisions, right?
Yeah.
And so that was also a part of it of like, well, I could see the parallel, right? And the difference between my activism during farmers' protest
Yeah.
and my work within committees. What was I getting done
Mm.
on my own and what was I getting done within the system? So I could very clearly see the disparity and I eventually resigned my roles because I was way too involved in farmers' protests offline, right?
Yeah.
Or offline as in not in the system.
Yeah.
And so that acceptance was like me having lived it and being like, you know, right? Your ego thinks you'll be happier. Your ego thinks you'll be secure. I miss the perks. I miss the incentives,
Of
right?
course.
It's like, but is that worth it for the trade-off of what you give? Not necessarily.
No.
Would I refuse to go back into the system? No. If I was able to go in, not as a practicing lawyer, but more of a mentorship aspect or coaching aspect in firms, I would 100% do it.
Yeah.
To go and drop the light seed in there to be like, this is why you can't retain people. This is why people hate you.
Yeah.
Like, you know, this is why your firm environment sucks,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I would go back in that space from both perspectives. And so that was a huge piece. And then trying to balance like the logical mind
Mm.
and the intuitive mind, but also seeing like really seeing, like you said, the way the law and policy is made and who it's made by.
Mm-hmm.
And these man-made rules are made for us to abide by within the system that controls us, right? A lot of the time we don't really have a say in what these rules and policy and legislation are or is unless we're aware that they're about to be passed, which people are becoming more aware of now. Bill C-11, for example,
Yeah.
Bill 36, like those type of bills where we're like, oh, these could be discriminatory or these could have a problem. First of all, Bill C-11, I'm not worried about. I know a lot of people have gone on a rampage of being worried about censorship.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about Bill C-11, not remotely. And so people can definitely have the right to be worried about it. I'm not concerned about that. If anybody's listening, I did a video on that on my YouTube, breaking it down and actually reading the bill.
Yeah.
Love like these are, you know, people think this is problematic, but they're not really reading what it's actually saying. They're reading the assumption, right?
Right.
And so that helps me, right? Know what actually can happen or doesn't happen, knowing the way the system works, knowing, but also on the flip side, knowing how hard it is to have justice in some scenarios.
Yeah.
When I stopped being in the big firm environment, mind you, I was working for insurance companies. And so if I was still there, you can only imagine the amount of shit I'd have to deal with or the amount of like, basically like, an alignment I would be in, breaching people's insurance for not having like COVID vaccines and just stuff like that, right? Like over
Yeah.
really stupid things, people losing their businesses. I would have had to deal with a lot of that.
Yeah.
I think that was a huge part of why I got fired before the mandates came into effect. Um, right? Like it would have
We
been
got to get
bad.
her
And
out. Yeah.
yeah, we got
Yeah.
to get her out. Like, this is not going to work.
Yeah.
And then when I started my own firm for that little bit, I was working a lot with small business, right? Like Corduroy Restaurant, I worked with Iron Energy Gym, so some bigger voices in that space. And so then seeing the resources that the government lawyers have, because I know the firms that they're in, I've been in those firms
Yeah.
to network, right?
Yeah.
They have unlimited resource. And that was really hard for me to see is like the way that they would essentially use sharp practice. And what that means is that they would use these very like, what's the word, well, essentially they would use these exceptions to get away with stuff and position their arguments in a way to marginalize the small business more.
Yeah.
And then I know the way in which it works, and so that was also really hard for me to watch, because I'm sorry to the judges that are justices, but a lot of them are not willing to take a stand. They're not willing to dissent. They're not willing to put themselves out there and say, this is wrong.
Yeah.
And so that was like, they're just saying, well, these were the rules. Well, were the rules based in fact, right?
Yep.
And for them, their fact is based on what Bonnie Henry is saying. Like, are you kidding me? After all this time, she's still saying the same shit.
Yeah.
And so I can see why the system is failing.
Yeah.
Right? I know how much it would take for it to change.
Yeah.
And so when it came to choosing a side, I was like, well, I can educate people on the way in which this would go down.
Yeah.
Or why things aren't turning out the way they'd hope, or what the jurisdiction issue is, right? A lot of those things I believe in. I think that the structure needs to be there.
Yeah.
I don't believe in the way that things have gone down.
Yeah.
I don't believe in essentially the cowardness of the legal system.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was basically taking a little bit of everything I do and packaging it as something that is hopefully reliable and credible. And that was what I had to just kind of hold on to, because I would get the confirmation through engagers saying, oh my God, thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, on days where I started to doubt, I would get the message that I needed to be like, all right, persevere, persevere, persevere. And I actually have a folder of messages screenshotted of like really meaningful ones, or ones that really made me emotional. So I can go back and read them when I start to doubt, to be like, this is why you're doing it. This is why you're doing it. Because your ego just wants to take you back all the time, right?
In the safety of it all too, right? So like I literally, the podcast that just launched today was about the duality and about the ego as a gift to the spirit, as the spirit is a gift to the ego. And we drop into this 3D matrix earth experience for that alone, to feel that. So the infrastructures that have been created, like you've been talking about, the legal system specifically, was made in a certain energetic field to hold the capacity of the duality within all of us. And it's not like it's being controlled in a certain mechanism now that is not doing the light work that it's meant to do, to hold space for the adventures, I call them, or the lessons we're meant to learn on earth. It's now completely taken over potentially by those elitists that want to control us and keep us diminished. But like you said, that light peak, like if you were to go back, and you're not opposed to go back in a certain way to peak light through. You know, I had a client once that I worked with, and she was in an infrastructure ran by a 3D matrix, and she was about to be graduated into a very high up position that she would have some power. And she said to me, look, so we did a clearing on her first, which I know that you are well versed in. Like, let's clear out all the fucking shit out of the field right now. All spells, curses, binds, all the bullshit that's been in your field holding you back. And let's get you in purity of light. And let's start asking the questions. And she was meant to be in that infrastructure to start spreading a light and seeds into it. Will it ever come to form in this lifetime while she's alive? Most likely not. But her job is to, that was her mission, was to sprinkle in. And some of us are loudly collapsing narratives where hers, because the infrastructure was so tightly wound within this control mechanism, she has to bring it in pieces to
Totally.
blow
Little
it up from
threads.
the inside. Yeah. So I get and
Mm-hmm.
understand that whole dynamic of what you just spoke to, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And it's happening more and more. And I feel that, well, not feel, I've read and heard from other people in the field that, like, that they agree with what I say.
Yeah.
They just don't feel they have the legs to stand on to be vocal about it, whether they consciously know that or not. I mean, I do have some lawyer friends that work for themselves that are more confident in speaking up, or more confident in maybe sharing my posts or sharing other posts, or, like putting it out there that they disagree.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in a firm or you work for the government, you're in the courts, right? Like, your eyes are mostly on the back of your head, not in the front of your head.
Yeah, seriously.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
you're always looking, and I was always looking back after I would post something about the farmers protest, like, what would a partner think about this? What would think about that? And the only reason I had a little more confidence in that at the time was because it wasn't happening here.
Mm-hmm.
Because they couldn't really speak to the impact of it in India, because they were white men.
Yeah,
They
they had
didn't
no
know,
clue. No clue.
right? And so if I were to speak about stuff happening here and then the firm brings in mandates, it's a completely different scenario, right? And so, like I said, it all happens serendipitously in terms of timing.
Yeah.
But I definitely agree, like, individuals like your friends are meant there to sew these little golden threads through,
Yeah.
the messaging, through the way they communicate, um, how they kind of like restructure
Yeah.
within their facilities. And I think that that's also very important, because we're never not going to really have the system we have, right? Not for many lifetimes, at least. There's going to be ways to maneuver around it, or to be heard, or to get your resources, without having to rely on it as much.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of getting equity, there has to be a shift. And like you said, it was built in that old paradigm. It was built in that old kind of infrastructure, and it was built in old energy, right? So the energy of who was in there, as well as who was submissive, who was awake,
Yeah.
who was, you know, actually understanding how oppressive it was, like, it's only increased, right?
Of course. Yeah.
And so we have a lot more rights now, a lot more opportunity, a lot more access,
Mm-hmm.
where the access wasn't there when it first started.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like, even like the RCMP, like, as well respected as they were or are, or had been before, when you learn about why they were created now, that information is actually out there.
Yeah.
So we actually have the choice to make our own opinion, which
Yeah.
we didn't really have before. We didn't have the resources. We didn't learn it in school in history, right? We didn't learn about um, residential schools. That only started in 2015. That's crazy,
Right. Yeah.
right?
It
So
is.
all those, how that all links together is shifting all of us.
Well, and also too, like, obviously we work within the spiritual realm, and I love how you have, like, and not that you waver at all, and not that you haven't made a clear decision as to who you are as a person in this movement, but you've got the very pragmatic sight line, and you also hold the vibration of the intuitive and the channeler and the spiritual embodiment, which I think it's really cool that you can see the dynamics of all this moving through. And knowing the light field that we're working within now, that's been accelerated through the earth, it's kind of changed the game for us to see things differently. Although all of it was already there, we just couldn't see it, right? We just couldn't see it. What are you finding is moving through your collective of energy right now, like working with clients? Like, where's one of the main, let's say, hangups, or one of the main lessons that you're finding is moving through that the collective of people you serve?
A lot of empowerment around self-love and boundaries. Actually, a huge part of awakening and ascension is creating boundaries. So whether that's within ourselves, with our partner, with our family and friends, a lot of people are on the 3D sense starting to see or listen to their intuition about where they need to create space or what they need to let go of. And again, I just look at that as empowerment overall. And so that's been really nice to see because I've been working with, certain collectives of individuals for a couple of years now. So to see what they started shifting a couple of years ago, starting to manifest in the 3D, and all those opportunities starting to manifest, or their energy changing to be more collaborative, that's been really cool to watch. And I want to do, like, I have my podcast, but I haven't really been like on it. I have a whole list of what my next topics are going to be, as well as for my YouTube. And a lot of them is even around my own culture and my own religion, and helping people really escape the cultural matrix that we live in. So, Punjabis and Sikhs are often intertwined because a lot of Punjabis practice Sikhism.
Okay, cool.
And so they're not mutually, they don't have to be mutual.
No.
Right? You have white Sikhs, you have Chinese Sikhs, right? Nepal Sikhs. Like, you have a bunch of other cultures or races that believe in Sikhism or are baptized to be Sikh. But one of the main things I'm really seeing and feeling right now is how our toxic kind of patriarchal culture has really held a lot of people back, because Sikhism is actually full spirituality. That's the only reason I can really follow it, is because of how pure it is, how neutral it is, how flowing it is. And when people start to kind of realize, like, oh, I've been like brainwashed to think that this is good, or brainwashed to think that this is bad, and that there's their own cultural notes to it. And it's going to relate to a lot of other people too. I guess I'm just trying to keep it niche, as in relating it to my experiences as well as a South Asian, and whoever it relates to, sure, they're definitely going to take what fits. But I've been seeing more of that, of people that are starting to feel better about choosing themselves. And we are really manipulated in our culture to choose our parents, to choose our grandparents, to choose all these toxic sort of lack of boundary approaches. I think that the boundaries overall, that's not culturally based, right? They're just maybe a little bit different in terms of what your norm is or how your household is, right? And again, that could extend beyond brown people. But I'm just seeing a lot more individuals standing up for themselves and their household, in their relationships, in their jobs. And I think that that's a great testament to the amount of work that people have done on themselves the last couple of years, right? Like, the reason that we went into this pandemic spiritually was to awaken, was to ignite that, was to, be introspective. That's why we were isolated. And I think that so many more, and what I see is they're using that now to actually change their life. And that's just going to end up like growing, right? That light's going to grow. They're going to pass it on to the next, and it's going to expand. And that's actually been exciting to witness on my end.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly about that. I said, when they created this whole pandemic and they dropped it into our field with their intention, they didn't realize what they actually did. You give society a time to quiet their fucking mind and not be in the hustle and not have, and actually feel what's important. Shit's going to change in their bodies and in who they are. Some people are going to stay scared and move down the rabbit hole with them and stay in that collective because that's what they know and they didn't want to shift. But the rest of us, we're going, excuse me, something's going on here.
This is funny.
I didn't fully own my spiritual side in the public and in the work that I do until later on in 2020 in October. If you knew me well, you knew I was always spiritual, and I always did side work, and I did it for fun. And it was like, I was a very pragmatic business coach, process development, leadership development, culture management, all the pragmatic side to the business structures, which serves me today still, because of the fact that I help people get into their soul's mission. And then those that are entrepreneurs, I help them create their own unique infrastructure that they can lead within and be in based on their light. But it was interesting for me. I resisted it for 6 months throughout the first part. And then all of a sudden everything fucking stopped. And I was looking around going, what the hell's happening? And they're like, we need you to start to own this. And as you know, with your guides, how you got fired from the law degree, they were like, we're done with all the stuff you've been doing. It's time. And I went, well, what
Yeah.
does this mean? And how do I really do this? And, like I floated through all that energy and I was like, I'll start in January. And then literally I started getting texts from referrals from people. And they're like, I heard you do like Akashic record work with soul, like alignment, and that you can help me with my business. And I was like, did the universe send you a text? Like I didn't fucking tell anybody about this, like,
How'd you hear from me?
I know, like, apparently I'm supposed to be doing this work, and
Yeah.
I had owned my psychic earlier on that year. And actually, like, I've been a psychic just like you for years and years and years, but I didn't see it that way or own it to be that way. And
Yes.
when you brought up the boundary piece, I really feel like we're in that space of owning who we really are and stepping into our power within our own uniqueness, which then gets us to be able to create boundaries or to honor our self-love or to honor what we really desire and need
Yep.
in our lives. Yeah.
100%. And it's once we're on the other side of creating the boundary and enforcing it that we see how beneficial it is.
Yes.
And what people don't see on the outset when they're still very much an ego is that their boundary is actually what helps them get to where they want to be, right?
Mm.
Clearing out the noise, clearing out what's feeling unaligned. Have to set that, have to say no, right? Like, no is such a powerful word, but we're taught to be like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe, yeah, okay, yeah. Right? Or cringing a little bit when you say it and your body's like, why? But you say yes anyways.
Are you sure? Are you sure?
Yeah.
I go like this. Are you sure? Like this.
Are you sure? I'm gonna make sure you're really burned out after this one. It's like, it's okay. I'll relax after.
Yeah.
And those boundaries are huge in maintaining our alignment.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not really kind of checking in with ourselves all the time to be like, do I really want to do this? Is this really working?
Yeah.
We just continue on that rabbit hole. That's also why people have continued in the system, because they feel that being burnt out is a sign of success, right?
Yeah.
We've been taught and conditioned to believe that.
Oh, yeah. So much. What do you like at right now in the collective of energy? Do you do astrology at all? I am not sure. Okay, yeah. So obviously, we're about to hit eclipse season, and I'm not an astrologer by any means at all, and I never pretend to be, but I am attached into fields of awareness, understanding what this actually means. And I feel, and I've seen it all morning, literally all this morning, that we are shifting one of the biggest life lessons right now and moving through them as a collective of energy within ourselves. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. And I think it's like also our concept of self, right? And we're on the weekend. If anybody listening to this is listening to it during Mercury Retrograde, I'm putting out a free video on what Mercury Retrograde is, the scientific as well as the astrological side and intuitive side. And so, and then I'm going to kind of have that same video people can watch through every Mercury Retrograde, because it's just based on understanding what's happening. Right. So we're going to start that on the 21st, and it's going to go until the 14th of May. And we end up having the pre and post shadow period. I'll break down what all that means in that video. But overall, once we start to go through that sort of energetic exchange with the universe, we start to see what's not working for us, right? What do we need to kind of revisit and redefine and adjust within our life? And when that's combined with this eclipse energy that we're going to have basically in a couple of days from now with the new moon, we're going to be really seeing like, okay, this is a supercharge, right? We're at full battery, full capacity. And what ends up happening is what is enhanced around us as not working, not fulfilling, is what basically Mercury wants us to address once and for all, right? Yeah. And we can continue to go through these lessons and karmic patterns for a long time if we don't want to let go of things, if we don't want to have those boundaries, if we don't want to change our life because we're uncomfortable, right? Yeah. But the planets all collaborate with us to show us, right? Like, what is going to be meaningful, what is going to happen. The new moon and the eclipse is going to be in the sign of Taurus. We're in Taurus season coming, right? So it's like, all right, sometimes it impacts people with Taurus, sun, moon rising or other placements more so than not. But that whole self-worth and value is now going to be rooted in our 3D reality. What do we need to do to really encompass that? What do we need to do to bring our energetic kind of projection and positive aspirations, like what do we need to do to now bring that into the 3D, right? Where's the gap? And
Yeah.
that's going to start to become really apparent in the
Yeah.
next couple of weeks of like, this is what's holding you back. And I posted on my new kind of page that I have on the side yesterday, Beyond the Eyes, that even myself, I was doing the academic coaching and consulting stuff. I took it on because I like to mentor students,
Mm.
and I was helping people get, do like med school prep and all of that. I just was not working.
Yeah.
And I was thinking like maybe I'll wait until the weddings, we're getting married in June. And I was like, yeah, I'll wait. And then I already have 3 weeks off, so I'll just like probably not go back. And I was like, screw this. Like,
Yeah,
this is
seriously.
unfulfilling. This is
Yeah.
not working for me. Like, no. I talked to Raj too, and I was like, this is kind of what I'm thinking. And he's like, yeah, you obviously already know. And I was like, yeah, fine. I'm gonna wake up tomorrow and quit. And I just did it because like you have to do that. And at the beginning was not easy. That first firm job, I stayed an extra month, right? And
Mm.
we sometimes need to take a little bit of time to build up our like elasticity or comfort in like making those really what seems like jarring decisions. But
Yeah.
when you feel that relief, you're like, oh yeah, this isn't
Yeah.
working. And some people don't want to face the mirror, which is why the patterns continue.
Mm.
But more and more individuals are willing to look at like, all right, I see in my mind's eye what is what's just not in alignment. And I think that more people are going to be shifting into what's more purposeful for them
Yes.
and seeing those changes. And the summer is a real expansive time in
Yeah.
terms of energy. And so it's going to start to really benefit those, and you're going to start to see the rewards in and around, July is when it
Mm-hmm.
usually happens, even though we'll see them before.
Yeah.
You just have to be willing to make the difficult changes.
That's it.
And the planets are aligning us with that right now too.
Yeah, it's like I always use the term you can't make this shit up, like everything
No.
is stacked in our favor right now. And I call it game time when I'm talking to people. I'm like, we're at that pivotal point. Like it's time to step into the game and not to be scared about moving through these next levels. Like we're fully supported. And if we're leading in our light and in the purity of that, and we're doing the work that we're meant to do and the impact we're making and that ripple effect in the world, you're going to find people, it's all going to be okay. It's going to get easier, but we
Yeah.
got to make those first few steps to make the call, step in, do the healing, whatever it is that we're being guided to do.
100%. I agree.
Yeah. So I want to ask you this last question before we kind of move into finishing this, because we've been almost riffing here for an hour. It's been
Yeah.
amazing. And I love it. I love all the things about it. But what are you
Same.
feeling in your energetic field right now as what the movement is over the next few years for humanity, and where can people really start to like, we know they have missions and we know it's time to illuminate their light, but where can they really grit in based on what you've been seeing move through? And whatever you want to speak to in this is totally amazing. I just like to hear your opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
This year we're going to start to see more accountability
Mm.
within and next couple of years within the government system, right? There's going to be more like all these things that are starting to come out that we're seeing, whether scientific evidence or them basically claiming what we already know as our truth, right? Or
Yeah.
what we've been saying is our truth, but we're called conspiracy theorists about. Um, all that is going to become essentially fact,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there will be a lot of kind of vindication for those that have been feeling really down about their intuition or really down about what's been going on. So we're going to see all of that change, as well as less reliant on, it will be less reliant on our systems, less reliant on the government. And the thing is the reason we're reliant a lot of the times is because we're not connected to like our energetic and holistic self, right?
Yeah.
So whether that's medically, whether that's the court system, etc. And litigation and the court system, majority of the time, not always, majority of the time is due because of ego, right? Due to ego.
Yeah.
So we litigate due to ego. So that's always interesting to see, like the back and forth. And on the personal side, which may sound kind of weird for some, is there's going to be a lot of shift in relationships,
Hmm.
right? Is your partner coming with you or are they not? Are
Yeah.
you in alignment with who you're sleeping next to every night? And how I explain it to my clients is we swim in a collective pool of energy, right? We swim in the collective pool of energy within our homes.
Yeah.
So if people within the four corners of your homes are not in alignment with you, is that really hindering your ability to ascend?
Hmm.
And that starts to become more apparent. The more resistance you feel, the more backlash, the more you argue, the more you're trying to validate or reassure or defend yourself,
Yeah.
right? And so sometimes people will want to kind of like beat a dead horse and continue in that dynamic.
Yeah.
But a lot more individuals are starting to empower themselves to make a different choice. And
Mm.
even though, sure, we're 3D people, we're 3D conduits, we make this choice or this contract in the 3D world, our energy is not the same. We can reincarnate in our own body
Yeah.
dozens of times throughout our lifetime, right? Like I don't know how many times I do that in a year now,
Yeah. I
right? Like
know.
now it's kind of like becoming really solid in who I am because everything's pretty in alignment, right? What I'm
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. I
But
love
when
it.
you're adjusting, you're going through these reincarnations in your physical body all the time, which is why you feel tired and you feel depleted and you have, a new perspective. That's because you're activated in a whole new way.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will start to now make those decisions despite what they think culturally, despite what they think systemically, or because of society. They're going to start to really do what feels right for them, despite what they've been taught that they should do.
Yeah.
And I can't remember where I heard it, but the word should tends to be an ego thing, right? I should do this. This
Yeah.
should happen. It should be this way. But
Yeah.
when we adjust, we're a whole different person. So think of yourself as just a different individual. Like you're not even the person you were,
Yep.
right?
At
Like,
all.
and
Like I
at
look
all,
back, I
like,
laugh at my videos from like 2019 and 2018. I was like, I call it baby Colleen. But if I go back
yeah,
like 12 years ago, I'm like, oh my God, this is like the infant in me. Like you watch
100%.
it all move. Yeah, I totally agree.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I cringe when I like see old pictures of myself, but then I have to hold space and have empathy, and I'm like, oh my God, don't say that. Like I feel bad that she was so lost,
Yeah. But she
right? And
got
we
you to
see
where you
that
are today, right?
100%.
And we hold
Yeah,
space for her at that time. I go, I wouldn't be here in this form right now in this awareness
yeah,
if she didn't make that choice at one point in time or take that course or get in with that mentor or do all those amazing things that she did,
exactly,
not knowing where it would lead, like
exactly.
so it's so interesting. And I know that you and I could speak to so many things and so much stuff, but I want to hold space for you as well. Like what do you have going on? We're obviously going to put in the show notes connections, how to get in touch with you. I'll make sure that Mercury Retrograde video goes in there as well that we referenced through the way. But what do you have going on right now? And how can people like come into your world if they're feeling called to that?
Oh yeah, that's kind. So my Instagram is at the.rkh. So my initials RKH. And the rkh.com. So that's also linked in my Instagram there. What I'm mainly doing right now is focusing on individual coaching,
Mhm.
and generally helping people figure out their way through their ascension, right? So people always ask like what that looks like. It's basically holistic therapy. Like we talk and we coach, but I also know the root of things, whether that's within your Akashic records, past life stuff, currently, if you have blocks in your current circumstances of what that is, and working through that. And
Yeah.
so I have that. I also have my infertility program called the first trimester. So women that are seeking to become pregnant or have had difficulty, it's a 3-month program with exercises and meditation and coaching and instant messaging where we go through what's going on energetically within you that's holding you back from your manifestation, and working through those blocks. And so those are kind of the main things, as well as my general kind of energy clearing, which is working through culturally, mainly like a lot of black magic stuff and voodoo,
Mhm.
but that could be with anyone. So all of that information is linked on my page and on my website. And yeah, the Mercury retrograde video I will send to you.
Yeah.
And people are going to be able to access that and learn about the scientifics and the intuitive side of Mercury retrograde and what it's meant to bring us and teach us and what it is and why it's not really scary, even though
Yeah, I
pop
know.
culture loves to label it as like, oh my God, your life's going to end tomorrow. Um, So yeah, they're the main things, and how to kind of see what's going on, or to get in contact with me.
Yeah, and I love the truth you speak on Instagram. So I'm going to highly encourage everyone to go follow you there as well, because it's like the potency of the power you emit in the world, and I love it. That's why I got attracted
Oh,
to you
thanks, Colleen.
right off the hop. But you know, it's so funny. Do you find I this is a personal question I want to ask you, which I'm sure the collective will be in agreement to, but you mentioned black magic, and I used to have a past life, well, a few of them, where I practiced it in a way of not light and love in alignment.
Hmm.
You know, my witchy days where I used to hold space that way. Has it been in your awareness for a while? Like, have you been clearing it for a while, or do you find that it's a new vibration moving through, like over the last 6 months to a year that we're noticing it come in?
Oh, no, no, long, long time. And the reason I kind of spoke about it culturally a bit, and of course I'd help
Yeah.
people outside the culture of South Asians, is because this is something that is heavily practiced within the
Mm,
South Asian community,
got it.
something that I've been impacted with, that happened to me when I was basically a toddler,
Mm,
something I've been aware of for a long, long time. And so, in terms of me clearing it for others, it's been since I've had my business, right?
right. Yeah.
Um, and so I also have the side where I help South Asian couples kind of come together spiritually and clear any of the negativity, or give them that
Ancestral stuff.
protective bubble
Yeah. Yeah.
before their actual ceremony,
Oh, I love it.
because there's so much evil eye going around. So people are becoming more aware of where it could be coming from, which is why the boundaries are around.
Huge.
But in terms of its presence,
Yeah.
it's been centuries and lifetimes, and
Yeah.
a lot of those notes from past life or lives karmically is still being carried forward, and a lot of people are now graduating to not kind of have that as a part of
Yeah.
their aura, right? And
Yeah.
so they're able to say goodbye to that and put it to
Holy
rest to
karmic
move
debt.
forward.
Yeah. I asked that question. Well, and obviously I'm in awareness, past lives obviously happening in all these multiple timelines that we're in, but like using it and it being around. I just started recently clearing it from a certain collective group of people that kept coming into my field,
Mm,
from a certain specific person that was using black magic to diminish all their light to keep them under a control piece within her
mm-hmm.
infrastructure. And I wasn't in awareness to it until they started coming forth. But then I also know I have a contractual agreement with her that if she decided to use it, I would be the light that came in to swoop all the light warriors out so that they could be on their mission while she's
Right.
playing in her distortion. So I just asked that question because of the fact that I'm like, it's newer in my field, but I get and understand how you serve within that in the collective of energy and your imprint in the world within it. So I love and appreciate that. So thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that too. I think that what you're doing is amazing and needed, right? Because it's so easy for, I call it Dementor energy,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
come in and just completely. If somebody doesn't know what a Dementor is, then you should watch Harry Potter.
I Harry Potter
Everybody knows.
reference all the
Yeah,
time. Like it is
yeah.
like
Everybody knows I'm obsessed with Harry Potter by now. So
me too.
yeah, and so it's that it's able to set a vast cloud over us only because of the system we live in, only because the energy is collaborative with the distortion that's already out there.
Yeah.
And so it can kind of like put this blanket over you, right? Which is why more people need to kind of become aware and awake to it.
Yeah, I agree. And like highly encourage everyone to keep shining their light brighter, because even maybe you don't
Mm-hmm.
realize you clear people with your light as you move through the grocery stores or as you
Yes,
walk down the
100%.
street. It's like that vibrancy moves through the energy.
Yeah. I
So
always look at it
yeah,
as bubbles.
bubbles. Oh
Like you're
yeah, same.
walking, right? And they're popping
Yeah.
on people around you. So it's like, what is your bubble giving off to the person beside you?
Oh, I love this. I love this visualization. So cool. I want to leave. What do you like? I want to leave us on this note of like, what is your heart saying to speak to humanity today? Like, what's the last message from this podcast, of course, and obviously that you want to leave into the world, like that imprint, whatever it is that you feel called to share. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think just, choose yourself. We are taught to think about everyone around us, and it's not that we shouldn't think about people around us or that they're not worthy, but you know, sit with yourself and think about what you really want to achieve, what around you is not allowing you to achieve that. I mean, outside of general requirements and obligations, right? Like, not
Yeah.
saying if you're a parent, you should give up on your child. Absolutely not, because that is a
Totally
contract
true.
you have and you
Yeah.
should fulfill. But, if you have any toxicity around you or you're not feeling valued, like, you are worthy, you are valuable, you should feel that way with who you're around, right? To the ability that you can. And I think that, giving yourself the space and grace to go through those motions, to change your mind, honestly, as well. Like, our ego likes to tell us we shouldn't change our mind because it's a form of control over us, right? Our
Mhm.
ego wants to tell us you shouldn't do something different because you made a commitment. But again, you're not the same person you were. So really, you aren't the person that made the commitment, right? You may look the
Yeah.
same, but you're not. And so allowing yourself to choose different and be different and not hold yourself in who you were or who you thought you were is going to be just great and liberating for you. And even though at the beginning it's going to seem really hard, and it is really hard, it becomes easier over time when you start to really focus on like the benefit of what you did.
Mhm.
You'll start to reap those rewards.
Yeah. And I love this. And thank you for speaking that out. The flow within us now that we get to move through is such a pivotal thing. And I want to honor your flow and being here with me and helping collaborate in this energy into the world. And I see you. So I just want to make sure I say that out loud. I
Oh,
see your
thank
light. I
you.
see you. And just so grateful to have had you on today, for you to spread more light in the world. And whoever grabs it, whoever takes it and runs with it, amazing. Have a great time. And yeah, just keep holding space for yourselves as we keep moving through this energetic upgrade. And again, Raminder, thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome, Colleen. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.